She ignored the old man, but what she didn't know was that he was the hospital's biggest donor. In the bustling corridors of St. Jude's General Hospital, Nurse Sarah was a rising star. Fresh out of nursing school, she was sharp, efficient, and had a reputation for getting things done. She moved with a purpose, her white sneakers squeaking softly on the polished linoleum floors. Sarah prided herself on her professionalism and her ability to handle the most complex medical cases. But in her quest for perfection, she sometimes overlooked the one thing patients needed most: a human connection. She saw charts, not people, symptoms, not stories. One Tuesday afternoon, the emergency room was chaotic, as it often was. A new patient was wheeled in, an elderly man with shabby clothes and disheveled gray hair. His name was Mr. Harrison. He had a persistent, rattling cough and looked frail, clutching a worn-out book to his chest. The chart listed him as having no family and a simple case of pneumonia. Sarah was assigned to him. She glanced at the old man, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Another simple case, she thought, a bed blocker who would take up time she could be using on more critical patients. She approached his bedside with a clipboard, her voice clinical and detached. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Nurse Sarah. I need to take your vitals." She didn't make eye contact, her focus entirely on the machines and numbers. The old man tried to speak, his voice weak and raspy. "Hello, young lady. It's a beautiful book, isn't it?" He held up the tattered book, its cover faded and pages yellowed with age. Sarah barely glanced at it. "Please hold still, sir," she said, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm. She was efficient, quick and cold. She gave him his medication, checked his foredrip, and was gone in less than 5 minutes. Over the next few days, this became their routine. Sarah would enter, perform her tasks with robotic precision, and leave. Mr. Harrison, however, tried to connect. He'd comment on the weather, ask about her day, or try to share a passage from his book. "This one's about courage," he'd whisper, his eyes lighting up. But Sarah always had an excuse. "I'm sorry, I have another patient," or "I need to check on some lab results." To her, he was just another task on her to-do list, an obstacle in her otherwise perfectly managed shift. She didn't see the loneliness in his eyes or hear the longing for conversation in his voice. She saw only his stained sweater and his simple diagnosis. Other nurses, like her friend Emily, were different. Emily would often stop by Mr. Harrison's room, fluffing his pillow and taking a moment to listen. "That's a lovely story, Mr. H," she'd say, her voice warm and genuine. Sarah would roll her eyes from the hallway. "You're wasting time, Em," she'd tell her later. "We have more urgent cases." Emily would just smile sadly. "Sometimes, Sarah, listening is the most urgent thing we can do." Sarah just didn't get it. She believed her skill and speed were what made her a good nurse. Compassion to her was an inefficient luxury. The turning point came on a Friday. The hospital's chief administrator, a stern and imposing woman named Ms. Albright, was doing her rounds. This was unusual. Miss Albright rarely visited the general wards. An air of tension filled the floor. Nurses straightened their uniforms and double-checked their charts. Sarah felt a surge of pride. Her section was immaculate, her patients were stable, and her paperwork was perfect. She was ready for inspection. Ms. Albright, flanked by a group of senior doctors, stopped at the nurse's station. "I'm here to see Mr. Harrison," she announced, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent hallway. Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Why would the head of the entire hospital want to see the old man in room 302? She confidently grabbed his chart and led the way. "He's right in here, Ms. Albright. He's stable, just a standard case of pneumonia." She pushed open the door, a practiced, professional smile on her face. "Mr. Harrison, you have some visitors?" But the scene inside was not what she expected. The old man was sitting up, but his breathing was shallow, and he looked weaker than ever. And he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Ms. Albright, and for the first time, Sarah saw a glimmer of a smile on his face. What happened next made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. Miss Albright's stern demeanor melted away. She rushed to his bedside, taking his frail hand in hers. "Arthur," she said, her voice filled with a warmth and respect Sarah had never heard. "You old troublemaker. I told you to call me if you felt unwell. Why do you always have to be so stubborn?" The old man, Arthur Harrison, chuckled weakly. Wanted to see if you were still running a tight ship, Eleanor? And to see the real heart of this place. He gestured weakly towards the room. The senior doctors all nodded at him with deference. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Harrison, it's an honor. The new pediatric wing you funded is already saving lives. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Pediatric wing? Funded? It was as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She looked from the shabby old man to the head administrator, to the reverend doctors, and back again. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't just Mr. Harrison. This was Arthur Harrison, the Arthur Harrison. The reclusive philanthropist who had anonymously donated millions to the hospital, funding entire wings and a state-of-the-art research center. He was by far the hospital's biggest and most important benefactor, and she had treated him like an inconvenience. Her mind raced back over the past week. Every rushed interaction, every dismissed attempt at conversation, every impatient sigh. She remembered his book, the one he tried to show her, and her cold dismissal. She felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't testing the hospital, he was experiencing it. He wanted to see the care, the real care that patients received, not the polished performance put on for a VIP, and she had failed, miserably. Miss Albright turned, and her gaze landed on Sarah. The warmth was gone, replaced by an icy disappointment that was far worse than anger. "Nurse," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Did you provide Mr. Harrison with the care and attention he deserved?" Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she say? Technically, she had done her job. His vitals were monitored, his medication administered. But she knew, in her heart, that she had failed in the most fundamental way. She hadn't cared for the person. Mr. Harrison, seeing her distress, spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor, the girl is young. She's efficient, just ... Needs to learn that a patient's spirit needs healing as much as their body." He looked at Sarah, his eyes not with anger, but with a gentle, profound sadness. That look was more cutting than any reprimand. It was the look of someone who had offered a hand and been ignored. That day Sarah didn't get fired. In some ways, what happened was worse. Miss Albright assigned her to be Mr. Harrison's primary nurse for the remainder of his stay, under Emily's direct supervision. "You will learn what it means to be a nurse from Emily," Miss Albright had said. "And you will learn it from Mr. Harrison." It was a humbling, mortifying experience. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah did everything for him. She brought him his meals, not on a tray left on the table, but cutting his food and sitting with him while he ate. She read to him from his worn-out book, which she discovered was a collection of classic poems. His voice was too weak, but his eyes would follow the words, and he'd nod when she read his favorite lines. She learned his story. He was a self-made man who had known great poverty in his youth. His wife, who had passed away in a hospital years ago, had been treated with incredible kindness by a young nurse. The nurse's compassion had inspired his philanthropy. He wanted every patient to feel that same sense of being seen and cared for. He wasn't checking up on his investment. He was searching for that same spark of humanity. Sarah learned to listen. She heard about his late wife, his love for poetry, and his belief that wealth was meaningless unless it was used to ease the suffering of others. She saw him not as a diagnosis or a donor, but as Arthur, a kind and lonely man who had a lot of wisdom to share. The wall she had built around her heart crumbled, brick by brick. She realized her efficiency was a shield, a way to avoid the emotional toll of the job, but in doing so, she had been avoiding its very soul. On the day Mr. Harrison was discharged, he was back in his simple, worn clothes. As Sarah helped him into the wheelchair, he pressed the old book of poems into her hands. "A good nurse reads charts," he said, his voice stronger now. "A great nurse reads people. Don't ever forget that, Sarah." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I won't, Mr. Harrison, I promise I won't." Sarah was never the same. She was still efficient, still sharp, but now there was a warmth to her. She made eye contact. She asked patients about their families. She took the extra minute to listen, realizing it was never a minute wasted. She became the kind of nurse Emily had always been, the kind of nurse Mr. Harrison believed in. The story of the nurse and the donor became a quiet legend at St. Jude's, a powerful lesson passed on to new recruits. And Sarah, with a worn-out book of poems always in her locker, made it her mission to prove that the heart of the hospital was not in its buildings or its equipment, but in the hands and hearts of those who cared. So what do you think? Did Sarah deserve the second chance she got? This story is a huge reminder that everyone we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about, and a little bit of kindness can go a long way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.